I didn't cry when they laughed. I just stood there, silent, letting the weight of my words settle into the space they thought was theirs to control. My name is Elena. I'm 38 years old, and these days, I live alone in a small, sunlit apartment, tucked above a quiet bookstore in Asheville. The kind of place where no one expects anything from you. No surprise visits, no guilt-laced phone calls, just the sound of pages turning and my own peace. But not long ago, I stood in my parents' living room during what was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. Everyone was there. My mother, arranging dishes with her usual nervous perfectionism, my father already half glued to his recliner, my siblings talking over one another like always. I had barely finished my sentence when they burst into laughter. I wasn't trying to be funny. "I'm done," I said. Calm. Almost too calm. Not with the night, but with them. With all of it. The words felt clean in my mouth. Not angry, not broken, just final. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just said it. Like someone placing the last piece of a puzzle before getting up and walking away. They didn't understand. Not at first. My brother laughed the loudest. "Come on, Lena. You always say stuff like that," he smirked. My sister rolled her eyes, reaching for the salad bowl like I hadn't spoken at all. And my mother, she gave me that tight smile she always wore when pretending nothing was wrong. But this time, I meant it. They didn't ask why I was done. They didn't pause to wonder if they'd missed something. They just laughed. The way people laugh when they think they've seen this scene before. Only they hadn't, because something in me had shifted, quietly, over the years. And that night, I realized I didn't owe them any more explanations. Growing up, my family didn't look broken from the outside. We weren't loud or violent. There were no slammed doors or shouted threats. But silence, the kind that tightens your chest, was our language. My father was the kind of man who believed his word was law. He didn't hit, but he didn't listen either. He never asked how our days were or what we were feeling. If you needed something, you were told to tough it up. If you cried, you were too sensitive. Especially me. I was the youngest of 3. My brother Mark could do no wrong. My sister Jenna learned early how to keep the peace by siding with whoever had power that day. But me? I learned to disappear. I was the quiet one. The one who stepped in to calm things down when my father's tone shifted, when my mother's nerves got too frayed. I was the one who carried plates to the sink before being asked, who cleaned up after gatherings while the others laughed in the living room. No one told me to. I just learned that being useful was the closest thing to being seen. Favoritism wasn't just emotional, it was visible. When Mark crashed the car at 17, Dad bought him another one, barely scolding him. When I needed money for a school trip, Mom said, "We can't afford extras right now." But she somehow found enough to get Jenna a new dress for prom the same month. Still, I tried. I really tried. I thought if I kept giving time, help, and forgiveness, that eventually someone would notice. That maybe love in my family just took longer to show up. There were times I spoke up. Not often, but I did. Like the time I told Mom I didn't like how Mark joked about my weight at the table. She told me not to be dramatic, that boys tease because they love you. Or when I asked Dad if we could stop bringing up my failed engagement at every holiday dinner, he smirked and said, "If you can't handle jokes, how will you handle life?" Each time I reached for a boundary, I was made to feel small, like my discomfort was a burden. So I learned to swallow it, to keep smiling, to become what they needed me to be. The calm one, the helper, the one who never caused trouble. Even as an adult, that dynamic didn't change. I stayed close, showed up for every birthday, every emergency. I drove my mom to her doctor appointments, helped Jenna move into her second apartment, and lent Mark money more than once without ever being paid back. And every time I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd treat me differently, something happened to remind me of my place. There was always a joke at my expense, a story from my past that they'd retell, twisting it into something embarrassing. And if I ever said anything, I was met with laughter or silence. Don't be so serious. Lena, you're overthinking again. But I wasn't overthinking. I was the only one feeling everything while the rest pretended nothing was wrong. The emotional weight didn't come crashing down all at once. It built slowly, over the years, like water rising in a locked room, quiet, steady, impossible to stop. And I told myself, again and again, that love meant staying. That maybe if I just kept showing up, eventually they'd see me for who I was. Maybe they'd thank me. Maybe they'd stop laughing when I said something that mattered. But they never did. And that Sunday dinner, the one where I finally said, "I'm done," wasn't a breaking point. It was a release. It was Jenna's birthday. She had always made her birthdays a kind of spectacle: themed dinners, group photos, hashtags, gift registries. This year, it was dinner at a new upscale Italian place downtown, the kind where you need reservations weeks in advance, and parking is its own kind of warfare. I was surprised she invited me, to be honest. We hadn't spoken much since Easter. When I gently said no to helping her move a second time in 6 months, she'd gone cold after that, not angry, just absent, like I was no longer useful. Still, I said yes to the dinner. I bought a modest gift, a beautiful handmade scarf from a local artisan she once complimented in passing. I took time off work, showed up early. I even wore the perfume Mom used to say smelled too grown up on me. I walked in and saw the long table, already half full. Mark was there with his wife, my parents sitting close to the end. Jenna in the middle, sipping wine and laughing with her friends I didn't recognize. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a second. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "I didn't think you were coming." "I RSVP'd, I replied softly, holding out the gift bag. She took it, glanced inside, and muttered, "Cute," before setting it down on the floor beside her. There was no seat for me. I stood awkwardly for a moment, scanning the table. Every chair had a jacket or purse draped over it. Mark caught my eye and looked away. My father didn't even register me, and my mother, sipping her water, said, "Maybe ask the waiter if they can bring an extra chair." Not one person moved, to make space. I felt the blood rise to my ears, the quiet hum in my chest that always came before I swallowed something too painful to speak. "I'll just sit at the bar," I said, managing a small smile. Jenna blinked. "Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, if that's more comfortable for you." I sat at the bar alone, ordered a drink I couldn't afford, and watched them from a distance. I watched them laugh, pass plates and clink glasses. I watched my mother lean in to whisper something into Jenna's ear, and watched Jenna laugh a little louder after that. No one turned to look at me. When the waiter brought my meal, he asked if I was celebrating anything. I said no, just eating. I left before dessert. I paid my bill. I walked out into the night air and sat on the curb for a moment, clutching my coat closed like it could hold in everything I didn't say. Later that week, the second betrayal came. I got a call from my bank, a flagged transaction on my joint savings account, the one I shared with Mom to help with her emergency medical fund. It wasn't supposed to be touched without both of our permissions. I set it up that way intentionally after helping her pay off her last hospital bill. But someone had used it. A large withdrawal, several $1,000s, to cover family expenses, according to the note. I called her. She answered on the third ring, her tone breezy, as if we'd just spoken. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "I was just thinking about you." "I got a notification," I said, straight to the point. "About the savings account." There was a pause. Oh, yes. Jenna needed help booking her honeymoon. I figured since you weren't using it. Mom, I said quietly. That money was for emergencies. For you, she sighed. I know. But you know how hard things have been for Jenna. She just wanted something nice for once. She always gets something nice, I said. And you didn't ask me. Her voice sharpened. You're being selfish, Elena. It's just money. And we've all done so much for you over the years. Can't you let this one thing go? That was the moment, not the missing chair. Not the scarf that was never opened. Not even the money. It was that sentence. We've all done so much for you. I realized I had spent my entire life giving, only to be seen as a burden when I finally asked for respect. I took a breath. The kind that steadies you, clears your throat, without raising it. I'm done, I said. What? I'm done, I repeated. With this. With pretending we're a family in the way that matters. She said something after that. I don't remember what. I ended the call while she was still talking. Sat there in the quiet. I didn't cry. Just sat in that silence, breathing in the truth of it. How light it felt to stop trying. There's a memory I don't talk about much. Mostly because for a long time, I convinced myself it wasn't that big of a deal. I was 15. It was the night before my birthday, and I had baked my own cake. I don't remember why. Maybe Mom was busy, maybe I didn't ask. I'd found a recipe in one of her old cookbooks and spent the evening mixing, measuring, wiping flour off the counters in between glances at the clock. I even set the table in the dining room. Candles, paper streamers from the junk drawer, plastic plates in pastel colors I thought looked festive. That night, I fell asleep smiling, convinced this would be the year someone would notice the effort. The yow. Next day came and went. No one remembered. Mark borrowed the car without asking. Jenna had a sleepover with friends. Mom worked late, and Dad came home in one of his moods, barely grunting a hello. When I tried to speak, he waved me off, told me to stop hovering. The cake sat on the counter, untouched. I watched the frosting slowly dry along the edges. By 10 p.m., I scraped off a slice and ate it alone in the laundry room, the only space where no one would interrupt me with silence. I didn't cry. I just kept chewing. Thought maybe if I ate quietly enough, the lump in my throat would go away too. That was the first time I realized something I never said out loud in my family. Love was a currency you had to earn, and I wasn't earning it. From then on, I started shrinking myself. I stopped asking for things. I stopped announcing my birthday. I stopped baking cakes. Instead, I became helpful. I learned how to anticipate needs, how to step in before I was asked. I did my siblings' chores when they forgot. I drove my mom to her appointments before she had to ask twice. I told myself that if I stayed useful long enough, I'd be seen. I'd be wanted. But that night with the cake stayed with me. Not because it was loud or cruel, but because it was quiet. Empty. That kind of pain doesn't scream. It lingers. It shows up years later when you're sitting at a birthday dinner without a chair, and your sister acts like your presence is an inconvenience. It was never about the cake. It was about what it represented. A moment when I tried to matter and learned that I didn't. At least not in the way I needed, and the hardest part? I carried that belief into adulthood without realizing it. I let myself become the background, the person who blends in, who smiles on cue, who forgives first and speaks last. I told myself that love was patience, that family meant showing up even when it hurt. But now I see it for what it was. Not love, but survival. Not patience, but erasure. And now, I think back to that girl, 15, hopeful, frosting covered. And I wish I had held her hand and whispered, "You don't need to earn love. You already deserve it." After that phone call with my mother, something in me didn't just break. It cleared. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Like I had finally stopped twisting myself into shapes that made them comfortable. The first thing I did was close the joint account. I didn't tell her. I just went to the bank, signed the paperwork, and moved what little was left into an account with only my name on it. The banker was kind, didn't ask questions when I paused before signing. I think she could tell it wasn't just paperwork, it was a line in the sand. After that, I stopped showing up. I didn't return texts unless they were urgent. I declined invitations. I skipped Mother's Day brunch for the first time in my adult life, and when Jenna called to ask why, I simply said, I needed the day to myself. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind that made it clear she wasn't used to hearing that from me. I started going to therapy again. At first, I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there in that softly lit room, trying to untangle decades of quiet pain that had wrapped itself around my identity. It was the therapist who said it first. You've been performing emotional labor your whole life, Elena. But no one ever taught you that love isn't something you earn. It's something you're supposed to receive freely. That sentence stayed with me, so I began pulling back, not in bitterness, but in reclamation. I cleaned out the guest room in my apartment that I had always kept just in case someone needed to stay. I donated the spare linens, packed up the family photo albums, and slid them into a locked drawer I didn't plan to reopen. One by one, I dismantled the life I had built to keep their comfort above my own. I wrote a letter. Not to send, just to write. It was more for me than for them. In it, I said everything I never got to say aloud. How exhausting it was to be the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who drove through snowstorms to help them move, who paid attention when no one else did. I listed the small betrayals they never thought I noticed, the times they laughed when I cried, the years I kept showing up despite the silence, and I ended it with one line. This is not punishment. It's protection. I'm choosing myself. A few weeks later, I got a message from Jenna. She had noticed I'd withdrawn and wanted to know what my problem was. I didn't respond right away. I waited until I felt calm. When I finally replied, I wrote, I'm not angry. I'm just no longer willing to abandon myself in order to feel like I belong. She didn't respond. At least not with words. But 2 days later, I received a message from my cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. It was simple. I heard what happened. For what it's worth, I've always admired how patient you were with them. You deserve better. It was the first time someone had said it out loud. I didn't need an apology from my family. I wasn't waiting for one. What I needed was space, and now I had it. One afternoon, I saw my father at the grocery store. We made eye contact near the produce section. He looked older than I remembered, his posture more hunched, his expression unreadable. He didn't say hello. Neither did I. I just nodded, gently, and walked past him. And it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't painful. It was peace. For the first time, I didn't feel small when I was in the same room with him. I didn't shrink or second guess or smile, out of habit. I just moved on. That, to me, was justice. Not revenge, not a fight, just the quiet, steady reclaiming of my own life. The first morning after cutting contact, I woke up and listened, not to a phone buzzing with messages or the familiar dread of a family obligation I hadn't agreed to, but to quiet. Real, uninterrupted quiet. It was still early, just past 6. The city outside hadn't quite stirred, and the light in my apartment was soft and gold, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I didn't check my phone for missed calls. I didn't rehearse how to say no without guilt. I just stood there, barefoot on the tile, and made myself a cup of coffee. I drank it slowly, the way I always wanted to. Hot and without rushing. And it hit me in the most gentle and beautiful way. I didn't have to earn this peace. It was mine. There were hard days, of course. Grief doesn't just disappear when you choose yourself. It lingers. It knocks gently during holidays, shows up in the ache of a memory, or in the way you instinctively reach for your phone before remembering. There's no one to call. Sometimes I miss them. But then I'd remember what I was missing. Not a family that saw me, but a role I played. A mask I wore for their comfort, not mine. And without that role, I found room for someone else. Me. I started reading again. Real books, not just audiobooks squeezed between errands. I joined a community pottery class, something I always told myself I didn't have time for. I started walking without a destination, letting my feet take me where they wanted. I stopped apologizing for being tired, or quiet, or unavailable. I learned to sit with my own presence, not as something to be justified, but as something to be cherished. Eventually, some people noticed. A few friends told me I seemed calmer, more centered. One even said I looked lighter, like I'd finally stopped dragging something invisible behind me. Maybe I had. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror after washing my face. Just stood there, looking at my reflection without editing or adjusting, and I whispered it, not to anyone in particular, just to myself, to that girl who once baked her own birthday cake and ate it alone in the laundry room. I'm proud of you. Not for walking away, but for finally staying with myself. There's no dramatic ending to this story. No fiery confrontation, no last-minute apology or letter of remorse. Just a woman who learned that love without respect isn't love at all. That silence can be sacred. That peace, real peace, comes when you choose it, even if no one claps, when you do. And now, when people ask about my family, I tell them the truth. Not the full story. Just enough. I say, we grew apart, and I'm okay with that. Because I am. And when I said I'm done, I meant it. Not in anger, not in spite, but in self-respect, in clarity, in quiet strength. And this time, I meant it forever.